What's up, everybody? Peacemaker Season 2 wrapped up a couple of weeks ago, setting up salvation for the future of the DCU, and today we're going to dive into some new updates on the next wave of projects for Gunn's new universe. We've got updates on Supergirl from the cast of that movie and a wave of Lanterns press as that show moved to post-production earlier this month. It's time to talk about the future of the DCU. I want to get things started here talking about Supergirl, which, based on recent speculation from THR, feels like it's going to be the first of these two projects that we see next year. But the first thing we got to talk about with that movie is a recent interview from David Krumholtz, who's set to portray Kara's father in the movie, Zor-El. He said, Supergirl is very true to the graphic novel it's based on, which is Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow by Tom King, in case you don't know. And then he continued, I'm thrilled to be sort of the next piece of telling the story of Krypton and further clarifying what the House of El is all about. So, with that in mind, let's just read straight from Chapter 6, Home, Family, and Refuge in the Woman of Tomorrow book. This is straight from the source, straight from the book. Supergirl tells Ruthie about her past along their journey in this story, and in fact, a lot of this story is actually Ruthie retelling their journey, so it's going to be interesting how the movie is going to handle that. Like, are we going to see their journey while the Ruthie actress, who I'm blanking on her name right now, but is she going to like voice over the movie? I'm not sure. It doesn't really matter all that much. And getting back to the point, I assume that Supergirl's background is almost going to be line for line in this DCU. In the book, it goes, she wasn't the baby who went off in the rocket. She was the schoolgirl who knew Krypton as home, family, and refuge. She lived in her world and she saw it die. It went on to describe that trauma in depth, but that's kind of the key to Millie's version of Supergirl, the key that we saw when she showed up to the fortress absolutely plastered. That was not her, loving life, living big. That's a coping mechanism. Part of that is that we're also going to see some of Argo City in this movie, and if it's really true to the comics, that's just another layer of trauma for Kara. She survives the destruction of her home planet, only to lose her mother, more of her people, and eventually her father too, and just be sent off like her cousin was. Cal, he got a loving family on Earth from a young age, and Kara, she got nothing but pain, and it's not just, all at once, it's one thing after the next. I think that's really important for James Gunn's vision of the Super Cousins, though, and you gotta remember Gunn cast Millie for this role himself. It wasn't Anna Naguara who wrote her movie, it wasn't Craig Gillespie who directed her movie, it was Gunn, and that leads me to believe that she's gonna be very, very important to the Superman saga, and so I expect to see Millie in Man of Tomorrow after her own movie. But this trauma, it's not something that she overcomes by the end of this story, but this journey and her experience with Ruthie point her in the right direction for the future. In my mind, her relationship with her cousin will be a big part of her, let's call it therapy. They both carry the weight of Krypton with them, but in two very different ways since she grew up there and he was only a baby when he was sent away in the rocket. Even as I say that though, James Gunn did say that in the DCU, Supergirl is going to be genuinely younger than Superman, and I'm going to worry about that when I need to because I don't buy it. And also, this Woman of Tomorrow story makes no sense almost if that's true. Then one more thing before we get to Lanterns, there's a rumor out there right now that Supergirl is undergoing 2 weeks of reshoots and David Corenswet is involved in whatever scenes that they're adding or touching up. Now, that comes from Daniel RPK, who's usually a reliable source, but lately, well, let's take it with a grain of salt as we do with all rumors until they're confirmed, but for what it's worth, I do think David is going to be in this movie. With that being said, it's time to move on to the Lanterns portion, and Aaron Pierre was recently featured on Men's Health magazine, and so we've got updates on the show coming from that interview. The showrunner, Chris Mundy, even got in on that one too, and before we get into it, I gotta say, there's one thing that we're going to touch on first that does kind of worry me, but overall, this boosted my confidence in the show big time. First off, we've got a new description for the show that I love, but also, like I just said, it does kind of worry me, and it goes, Pierre is paired with Kyle Chandler as the iconic Hal Jordan, who for many years was the Green Lantern most people knew. Together, this version of Hal and John find themselves in a buddy cop show wrapped inside a superhero show. Hal, he's an old school Air Force man who butts heads with the more calm and collected John, who represents a new generation. Now, that comment, and specifically the buddy cop show wrapped inside a superhero show portion, does concern me just a bit. It's the first time since the show was announced, and I know other people have had this concern, but I haven't really, and now I have been worried that we won't see them in their suits very much, and part of that is because of how little we saw of Peacemaker and Vigilante's suits in Peacemaker Season 2. However, if you look at the flip side of it, you could definitely read it the opposite way since they added the wrapped in a superhero show part, but let's just say, it's a lot of street clothes. My only wish is that if that's the case, they make it a bit where Guy Gardner is always in his suit no matter what. At the end of the day, though, I just want to see the boys and the Corps in all their glory as space cops. Which, thankfully, I think we are going to see that based on this comment from Chris Mundy, the showrunner. He said, "One thing we attacked from the beginning was that the Green Lantern powers, a lot of it is based in creativity. To manifest things from the lantern rings, you've got to manifest something from your brain, but also kind of from your soul. That's exactly what I want to hear, and it just gets better from there." Mundy went on to compare Hal and John in terms of how they wield their powers, saying, "I imagine it's not much different than being a sculptor or a painter, and Aaron had to be able to sell that John could have that ability. He understood that John would appreciate that aspect of their powers. We always joke that Hal just wants to hit everything with a big green fist. But if you're not a big Green Lantern fan, that quote, it might be a nothing burger for you, but for those of us with varying degrees of love for the Corps, it's a massive relief." That comment, as well as the actual confirmation inside of this interview, they did confirm it, revealed that John will have his history not only as a Marine sniper in the DCU, but as an architect too. That's something I hope they show with the VFX for the duo's constructs. It could be so damn cool. Finally, since we talked about Supergirl's comic accuracy, let's get into how accurate the Lantern show is going to be too. The showrunner revealed that everybody did varying degrees of comic book homework on their own, and we were there to answer any questions. But we aren't telling one specific chapter that's already existed in the comics. That right there, that's probably a Salvation tease. I just need to see, a trailer, a little bit more of this show before I get that tinfoil hat out of the closet. But getting back to Mundy's comment, the second half reads, "Our characters are true to the comics, but we're putting them in a new story. So the actors, they didn't have to dig into a specific period in the comics. It was more about understanding who John is and understanding who Hal is." I'm sure some fans won't like that, but for me personally, and with a brand new universe in mind, keeping in mind that the DCU has barely taken its first steps as an infant, I love this mindset of inspiration over adaptations. And so that's going to do it for today's video. I can't wait for these two projects in the next wave of the DCU, but as always, I want to know what you guys think about all this, so let me know down in the comments below and make sure you have a great day.